What's up, y'all? We are back at it once again, the Koski Fun Day. And we gonna get back into the series African Women, Pan-Africanism and African Resistance. In this one, we doing the Queen of Niger. That's not really known about, that I didn't know about it till I had to read it and I had to do a little bit more research of it. Her name is Sarraounia Mangou of Niger. And this is from the 19th century. We don't get into deep in her story. She did some immaculate stuff, that's not really discussed or talked about. Who is Sarraounia? Sarraounia in Hausa language means queen or female chief, but used genetically, and may also designate various or more or less minor functions of female leadership. Among the Ansa of Alou and Bagigai and the surrounding Hausa villages and towns of the Maghreb ethnic group, predominantly eminent until recently, the entire Sarraounia refers in a particular lineage of women of whom was selected through a specific ritual, takama, a female leader who exercised both a non-central and political and religious authority. From the Fulani Jihad and pre-colonial times to the encroachment of Islamic worship in the early Protestant era, Mali country is known for its unswerving faithfulness to the tradition of the Azna religion, as well as opposition to the conversion of Islam well into the 20th century, until recent. But a religious authority has long become the only remaining and contested prerogative of the Sarraounia. Even before the advent of colonialization, the Sarkin era, chief of the era, had seized political power through alliances and warfare, leaving out religious affairs to the Sarraounia and her priests. Currently, the Mangou and its 7 allied villages represent the last impoverished bastion of this once prosperous female chieftaincy, so it still exists to this day. Similar vestiges also exist in other neighboring regions of East Niger and northern Nigeria. Function of this particular religion and formerly political leadership is described in the social and the cultural and political world of Anzia, whose worldview is based on cults of nature and spirits and recognizes the crucial complementary of the male and female elements of the cosmos of society. So basically, they still study the religion crash system. In Niger today, the term Sarraounia generally treats as a name that conjures images of Sarraounia Mangou, the most famous of the Sarraouinas. Thanks to her resistance to French domination, a feat diffused marginally by the novel Summer Drame Maxime Fence in 1980, and it has a movie out on this. Neo-traditional ballads, popular representation, invisible signs of identification, and scantily historical accounts. Sarraounia Mangou currently wears the sandals of the historical female leader within the borders of the national political and religious landscape, where the women have, by large, increasingly lost power in both public and private and traditional model spheres. Particularly over the last 100 years, they bear the brunt of the problems of the underdevelopment in the states, one of the poorest in the world, which covers 1,116 kilometers, and more than 3/4 of which is situated in the Sahara. Most of the remainder, which is airly climate of the shale. Women account for a little more than half the population, with an average of 8 children per woman, and the highest maternal and infantile mortality rate in the world. 30% of access to prenatal care and 25% unemployment rate in government jobs, usually at the lowest echelons. Clearly, their lives are generally far removed from the heroines of those of heroines and queens. Meanwhile, Niger attempts to feebly toe the line in such areas as the equitable gender representation in parliament and politics. The promulgation of the family code is constantly postponed, and proponents threatened with a divine curse by certain Islamic religious authorities in this discussion are aborted. History books are far too few, largely ignored the queens, priestess, and female chiefs of the recent past, thus depriving Niger women and Niger society as a whole of the powerful role models they had made at home. Female empowerment transits through the available social economic interests. A notable religious example is that of a female involvement in the neo-traditional and Islamic religious practices and the use of signs of vestimentary distinct. Cults of spirit possession offer women open access to public visibility, authority, and prestige. Some women also participate in Islamic socializations, adopt a austere and distinctive garb, and engage in fundamental religion discourse, seek weekly media coverage on radio, TV, and teach in the Quran schools or more or less public female circles, and in pursuit of various others. opportunities to make strengthening use of the religion to promote itself. The chieftaincy of the group traces back to the original kingdom of Daria and one of the 7 original legitimate Hausa states, or Hakabawai. Unlike Habe and other Adamists, the Hausa Kingdom in northern Nigeria, there are figures among the new Habe kingdoms which managed to remain independent despite territorial losses until the Europeans arrived. Likewise, prior to colonization and well into the second half of the 20th century, many of the United Country remained un-Islamized. According to foundation myths, the Dari Kingdom, first in Hausa Baka, name of the one of its famous queens, had 17 queens as its earliest ruler. Queen Dara, we also learn, is succeeded by 8 more queens. After a man became ruler, women influence continued on the constitutional doctrine that the Malian could become a man in the orders of the chief and might, if necessary, dispose of him. The legends and myths of Hausaland in the present-day Nigeria and Niger resound with the defeat of the royal female warriors and recall as luxurious queens of the 16th century like Queen Amina, her sister Queen Zaria, whom the town Zaria in northern Nigeria is named. A few cultural vestiges in the current court of Hausa testify to the public positions of the powerful women, the power that women held. Usually, not exclusively of noble birth, in the Gabonese Emirate, East Niger, once was ruled by Queen Tara, or the Alia or Enna, and still holds considerable sway and is a variable presence. Meanwhile, Fatima Malinka notes that the private zones of female influence in family affairs, such as the Kasan or the circle of the Yamayang or the Danang, which is currently being eroded, formerly displayed in the public offices held by women such as ministers, counselors, or ambassadors, as witnesses of such titles as the Mangrab, the Majinga, the Aya, or the Ayan, or the Jadain, and so forth. Abba cited notes that presenting on the information of women under the Dizam of Usman Dafido. Usman Dafido was he's a historian way back when, and as a few valuable sources indicate, the women played an important role in the political life of the Kazim Borno Empire, East Nigeria, and in Daria, Queen Daramara, in Zazzau, Queen Amina, and in Bono, there is a Mary, a queen mother, and a Margarita, a Mayan official elder sister, and a Gizmu, the first wife of the Mayan. They had great power and influence. Traditionally, before the 19th century jihad, women in many Hausa states held titles and offices such as Enga, Magari, and Jagay, etc., and continue to do so today. I already mentioned in the institution of imaginary political Hausa, the former power of the princes of the Hausa state in contention. Today, contention is one of the few Hausa regions where female officials still have some influences. These princesses were the most eminent figures after the chief and were involved in his interment. How to prove no nominee in the poor political charges of the chief minister of female affairs and of the court. They appeared on occasions of royal ceremonies mounted on horses, held court, and gave personal gritos, etc. Some of these qualities were close to the Maghreb and saluted the Sultan of Zender. Further east, in the case of the Zaria Kingdom, directly linked in our field of inquiry, royal male dynasties are relatively late. Narratives legitimate in changing the male leadership in Islam was circulated by the Habara myth, which is now cited among the origin of the Hausa. So, it's a myth. They just made up some stuff. Nonetheless, female influence in the public sphere continued for some time in many areas, especially where jihad failed or mitigated successes. In 1905, when the French disposed of the Sultan of Zender, the influence of the Maghreb was then so important that the colonial overlord saw the necessity of paying a pension to compensate to the Maghreb, and her alone. In the same way, in 1963, 3 years after independence, the Enna of Gobi had to be pleased by the state. She is invited to the presidential palace of Naming to negotiate her acceptance of the new chief installed by the state, who could not be interned without her authority or participation. However, 30 years later, in 1993, female suffrage was revoked because of rural policy outcry. How did this come to pass? Anti-Islamic Hausa courts of the past did not completely reject Islamic presence, but the prestige of the Malman, a learned Islamic scholar, added to the chief's court was closely monitored. Aristocrats yielded to various degrees, usually superficial or secondary, to the attraction of Islam. but the Malians was not allowed to own land. Over-assuming Malians were expelled, and as far as possible, belligerent crusaders were exterminated. But other organized jihad, like those of Usain Dan Foto of Soto in today's Nigeria in 1806 to 1810, were a different matter. Where they succeeded, they were detrimental to the freedom and the power of women. This situation further deteriorated in the advent of a European colonial rule and the constant under a post-colonial state. With the advent of the colonial power, female chiefs like Sarraounia had to choose between male representatives to answer to the cultivation of the colonial minister. And this is the administrative position of the Mangou, or the village chief, was invented in Mangou. However, the region here resisted the influence of Soto from about 1860 to the beginning of the colonial era of 1900. Nonetheless, up until the French invasion, and even after, Mangou, though not a large chieftaincy, was far removed from its current minimization of demographics and economic level. In this region, the village of Mangou stands in the medieval angles of Niger history due to the resistance of French colonial penetration in 1899. At that time, when most soldiers in chief chose submission, a pragmatic strategy in the face of comprehensive, well-armed man army of the French, a non-belligerent priestess chief, Sarraounia Mangou, sent her men to fight, and when general to fight, continued to harass the French and their mercenaries through guerrilla and hunting techniques, through the fastnesses of nearby Arcadia that existed at the time, Arcadia forest that existed at the time. The bloody reprisal. But as Mother Matthew notes, the French choose to forget their gratuitous burning and plundering and beheading and shooting men and women and children and left in the face of the horror of eastern Nigeria up to Lake Chad. Due to this historical amnesia the French has, and the burning animalistic reinvention of oral tradition for the people to reach in particular, educated Nigerians interested in the history of Mangou and of the Sarraounia have few documentary sources at their disposal. The reflections are derived from primary sources from documentary sources. Our research group is interested in learning how these questions of female power were lived, represented, and interpreted in the system. These real and symbolic sites have much to do with memory of politics and trail and reincarnation of the fragment foundations of myth, recalling exile, migration, and the rights of the first settlers. Here, the term myth refers not to lies or fable, but to oral genre and the totality of the oral history to be held true. And long since the establishment of an indispensable resource of research of history, ethnology, and archaeology. Keep in mind the problematic of the memory and forgetting. I will take a closer look at some of the questions in memory. Our interview with a female village chief, Amina, about Sarraouia's power, including the following assertions. Mangou supremacy in the hierarchy of the local powers and spiritual and political notwithstanding inventions of the background genealogists, Mangou economic supremacy of the past was witnessed as once a flourishing market, then absent anywhere else in the vicinity. Village chiefs also regret over the failure of Mangou memory machine, which retains the name of mere 15 Sarraouinas compared to Bagley's 100 remember Bratras. While invoking this myth of supremacy and the rules of the harder conditions and relationships, the chief discourse includes colonial comparisons and historical argument. You know the Sarraouinas came in these parts. When she came, she had power she inherited. Our Sarraouinas like the Queen of England. Before the white man came, she reigned over the whole area, following the exact variant of the foundation narrative. According to history, she came from Egypt originally, but they did in fact set out from Daria. Where the whereabouts, she'll tell you this, that is true. She came into power because her father was a new king over there, and when her father died, she was a legitimate heiress. But a plot was formulated to put her to death. Then someone came to tell her what was going on. They had dug a pit under the sea where she was sitting during the enthronement. Immediately, she fled with her peoples during the night. So you see, the conspiracy was not intervened yesterday. They tried to pursue her, but failed to catch her. While on their way to stone of judgments, the mayor spoke of them, and this is what they was told. So this is the allure of where the queens came from. They came from ancient Egypt, according to the oral lore. This is contained all the basic elements of the oral foundation and presentation of other accounts. And then reliable to charge according to the audience and the narrator, or one or two participants is omitted. Two participants is omitted. Now we're going to get to what set the war off. Between this demographic of French officers, Alou and Sarkin in 1899, as recorded in their journal, The March, oral history attests that Alou was one of the chieftains required to pay tribute of enormous baskets of cow sherry to Sokoto, a tribute it demanded regularly. This is important because not only the chieftains had the economic power and the political importance were required to acquire the debt of allegiance, guaranteeing security from the raids by the Sokoto Jihadists and their envoys, but we had to make it a market argument, which you know that Alou would have been out to traditional Wednesday market for over 10 years. So that really would have affected the women in their economy, and the village had to go to markets and where they was at. So that would have really affected the economy there. So let's see what happens next. The French officer made this claim, and this is what he wanted. Well, we should look a little bit more into this French officer because it's they kind of connected at the hip from the little studies I've been doing. You know, he was a bastard. You know, his name was Van Buell. Van Lane submission. Yeah, that was a Van Lane mission. Excuse me, y'all. My French ain't good. Like, you know, language is utility. You know. So eventually he was doing all this. He burning villages and all that stuff like that. And he left out from Timbuktu. That's where it all started at. That's where he started coming down at. So when he left to Timbuktu, he took 50 trailers. Trailers are the African, that's when you see it with wearing the hats of the Moor and stuff like that. These are the African traders. You know what I'm saying? And Lieutenant Amina as the second. But he had a meeting, you know what I'm saying, and he was meeting considerable resistance on his advance on the local Queen Sahara at Alou. On April 16th, he encountered his hardest battle yet with 4 men killed and 6 wounded. Voulet took out his revenge on 8th of May in one of his massacres in French colonial history. He slaughtered the inhabitants of the village of Bernie-Kane, killing possibly thousands of people. So he went on a rampage after this. Following the trail that was left by the encounter flame with passage, a trail burned of villages and charred corpses. He passed trees where women had been hanged, cooked fires where children had been roasted. They up here roasting kids over fires. He also found corpses of expedition guides and those who were displeased by them strung up alive in a position where their foot went to the hyenas and the rest of their bodies went to the vultures. On the 10th of July, after the pursuit of 2,000 kilometers, Kambah arrived at Dandenra near Zander, where the villagers informed that Voulet and his men were just a few hours' march ahead. He sent an African surgeon with 2 soldiers to give Voulet a letter informing that he had been removed from position and needed to return home immediately. To this, Voulet replied that he had 600 guns in his cabin, and 50 of them were used if they dare come near him. Voulet and Chanoine was careful not to inform the other officers of Kambah's letter. In the following days, they kept him in occupied lands. On July 13, he had conducted his last massacre. After a villager killed 2 of his men, Voulet had 50 women and children slaughtered. The same evening, he wrote a second letter to Kambah, which he again told him not to even try to come close to him. Kambah did not believe the other officers or the riflemen would dare kill him or let him be killed, a superior officer. He was unaware that Voulet had kept new secret orders and that the precaution of Voulet was only made sure of himself and Chanoine would be able to preserve to receive him. Consequently, in the following morning, Kambah proceeded with his men to Dakakori, where Voulet waited. Upon seeing him, Voulet ordered his men to disperse and send Kambah's last warning, which Kambah ignored. Kambah then told his men not to open fire under any circumstances. In full dress uniform and with his legionary condor medal pinned on his chest, proceeded alone to Voulet, who kept telling him to go back. By emphasizing this warning, Voulet ordered his 2 salvos fired in the air. When Kambah addressed Voulet and reminded them of their duties, Voulet threatened them with a pistol and ordered them to open fire. Kambah fell wounded, still ordering his men not to return fire, but his words were truncated by a new salvo that killed Kambah while his soldiers fled. On the evening of Kambah's assassination, Voulet informed his officers of the clash, and while stripping off his walloons, proclaimed, "I am no longer a Frenchman. I am a black chief. With you, I will find an empire." The officers' reaction was far from enthusiastic, and a mood infected the truth. On July 16, an informant told Voulet that the troops were about to mutiny. Voulet and Chanoine assembled the riflemen, and after shooting the informant in front of the troops for informing too late of the impending mutiny, Voulet angered the soldiers and about their duty and to obey their leaders, at the same time shooting them. The Senegalese, because these are black African troops he's shooting at, you know what I'm saying, and we also doing, with French officers and all type of shit like that. The Senegalese returned fire, killing Calam, but Voulet escaped into the darkness and found refuge among some villagers. A sergeant then informed Lieutenant Paulin, the first French officer he found, of what happened and pledged the loyalty of the troops to him. The last chapter of Voulet's rebellion paid out the following. When he tried to re-enter the camp, he was blocked by a sentry who refused to let him pass. Voulet shot him but missed, and the sentry killed him. Paulin, who was now in command, decided to take Zender, and then the biggest town in present-day Niger, and form a former vassal of the Banya Empire. Bouhailer defeated the local ruler of Sarraounia and took the city on July 30th. So that's what happened. Now, some say this revolt that happened and all that stuff like that, they pushed them too far and stuff. Now, these guys' bodies, they buried them in Africa, but the body was never found. You know what I'm saying? They did something to them, whatever. But this queen, you know, she kept it going. She kept the revolt going, as she said, and the oral history said they're from Egypt. So, you know, that's a lot to talk about. But give a shout out to this queen because she did her thing, and she defeated her enemies. Had her enemies collapse on each other. So we got to give this queen much credit and much props for doing what she was doing. All right, this is Much Love. This is Pan-African Women. This is African Women, Pan-Africanism, and Resistance. And this queen definitely led the charge, you know, doing her thing. Had that guerrilla warfare and stretched the French out for a long, long time. Even had them fighting themselves. So we got to give credit to that strategy, what she done did. This is Coach Get Fun. They saying subscribe to the channel, and much love to this ancestor. Peace.